Dames en heren, het is my voorreg om nou die volgende paneel aan te kondig. Chris Klopper van die Suid-Afrikaanse Onderwyserunie is eerste aan die woord. Ons wy die volgende 45 minute aan die vraag hoe ons 'n verskil kan maak in skole. Elke spreker sal dit interpreteer op hulle manier. Sprekers het so 7-8 minute elk om hulle saak te stel en dan gaan ons kortliks vrae hanteer uit die gehoor uit. Chris, oor na jou. Baie dankie.
Die eerste belangrike punt wat 'n mens moet oorweeg, is die punt wat Darwin gemaak het. En dit is dat ons kan nie aanhou om dieselfde goed te doen nie. Ons sal elke keer moet aanpas by die veranderende omstandighede wat op die politieke landskap vir ons mee gekonfronteer word. En as ons dit nie doen nie, dan gaan ons die dinosourusse word en dan gaan jy doodgewoon uitsterf. Net kortliks weer eens dat ons net kyk na die demografie, want as jy hoor wat die demograwe sê, sê hulle vir jou dat demography is today's future that you can read tomorrow. So, dit is die belangrike ding wat ons daar vir mekaar kan sê. En wat belangrik is hier uit 'n Weskaap perspektief is dat die mense ook kyk hoe groot julle stelsel is en baie belangrik hoe groot die geografiese areas. Dit het vir my verbaas om te sien dat julle eintlik groter is as 'n provinsie soos Limpopo. Weer eens is belangrik dat ons dit moet ook in ag neem, is dat jy moet kyk na die kwessie van waaruit kom die Afrikaanse sprekers en dit vergelyk met die hele kwessie van waarmee 'n mens gekonfronteer word. Want weer eens soos ek sê, die demograwe sê vir jou dat demografie is die realiteit waarmee jy moet te doen hê. En daarom is dit belangrik dat ons moet dadelik besef dat jy kan hierdie stryd doodgewoon net nie alleen oorwin nie. Daai skyfies wat ek daar vir jou wys is die ouderdomsverspreiding van onderwysers. En wat jy daar sal sien is dat die piek is daar oor die 50 jaar. Daarom is die gemiddelde ouderdom van onderwysers, en spesifiek Afrikaanse onderwysers, is omtrent 49 jaar. En wat jy daar ook kan sien, is dat dis die verskillende provinsies, en hulle almal se ouderdomsverspreiding is basies dieselfde. So, ons moet jong mense in die stelsel kry, en hulle moes reeds eergister al in die stelsel gewees het. 'n belangrike punt wat ek vir u wil uitwys hierso is die wysigings op die SA skolewet, en ek gaan dit nou koppel aan die jaarlikse nasionale assesserings waaroor verlede week so groot baai was, en waar baie mense gesê het, maar hoekom boikot julle die aksie? Die beginsel is, jy kan sekere goed tot op 'n punt aanvaar, en dan moet jy jou stem dik maak, en moet jy enige vorm van verset moet jy begin wys. Daar's 2 veranderings wat in die vooruitsig gestel word. En ek weet dit is op die tafel, ek het dit al gesien, en ek het verlede week met die minister gepraat, en dis die volgende. Die eerste een is dat hulle wil die regte van beheerliggame om beleid te bepaal met taal, godsdiens en toelating wil hulle wysig. Nou kollegas, vir u in die Weskaap is dit nie so 'n probleem nie, maar ek sê vir u, in die ander provinsies is dit katastrofaal as dit gebeur. Hierdie is die werk van 'n persoon soos Lesofie, wat uit die ANC caucus oortuig het om hierdie wysigings aan te bring. En dis ongelooflik verrykend wat vir ons voorlê. En dan die een wat vir ons die meeste pla, is dat die staat wil weer 'n greep hê op die aanstelling van alle bevorderingsposte. Weereens vir u in die Weskaap is dit nie 'n probleem nie. Maar ek sê nou vir u in provinsies soos in Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, die Oos-Kaap, is dit katastrofaal. Jy gee dit vir die departement en hulle besluit wie daar aangestel gaan word. En wie gaan hulle aanstel? Hulle gaan hulle SATU-manne aanstel. En soos ons weet, as jy 'n skool wil verander, dan verander jy die skoolhoof en dan is alles daarna as maklik. So hier lê vir ons groot werk voor. Dis baie duidelik, hulle wil terugbeweeg na die beginsel van 'n staatsskoolmodel. En dis nie 'n openbare skool nie, hulle wil teruggaan na die model wat in 1976 was. En dit sal nie help dat ons verloor moed hieroor nie, maar ons sal regtig met vindingryk te werk gaan oor ons hierdie uitdaging te bowe gaan kom. En ek het reeds met Paul daaroor gepraat en ons sal seker kyk wat ons kan doen in die volgende week of 2. Oor die HNA is die volgende. Ek gaan vinnig almal net opsit. U sal sien dat ons het verlede week het ons sterk standpunt ingeneem hieroor. En hoekom het ons so sterk standpunt ingeneem oor? Ons probeer sedert Maart verlede jaar met die minister 'n gesprek voer oor die jaarlikse nasionale assesserings. Om te sê die ding is heeltemal besig om te ontaard, dit was nooit wat ons in gedagte gehad het nie. Sy het ons geïgnoreer, ons het in Maart hierdie jaar weer gevra, sy het ons weer geïgnoreer. En toe verlede week toe sy die audacity om vir my te sê, maar sy weet van die versoek wat ons rig, ons kan nou begin met haar praat. Kollegas, die probleem wat ons met die JNA's het is die volgende. Dit was nooit die bedoeling gewees dat 'n sistemiese evaluering elke kind moet toets nie. En wat hulle nou doen is, nou toets hulle elke kind, en dis nie hoe jy 'n stelsel of 'n stelsel evalueer nie. Want jy het 'n stelsel nodig, of jy het 'n stelsel evaluering nodig om te kyk, wat is die standaard daarvan, waar is die tekortkominge, en dan gee jy vir jouself 'n 3-4 jaar periode tyd om daardeur te werk en die regstellings te doen. Dit is nooit gedoen nie, en nou soos van elke jaar is ons in hierdie proses in vasgevang, en elke jaar weeg ons die skaap, en elke jaar dink ons die skaap gaan swaarder weeg, en ons sonder om te voer. Dis soos om 'n pasiënt net sy temperatuur te neem en nooit iets te doen om by die oorsaak uit te kom nie. En wat baie belangrik is wat jy daar sal sien is dat die werklike fokus moes gewees het op grade 3, 6 en 9. Nou toets ons almal. En wat gebeur? Die onderwysers merk dit self. Hulle merk dit soos hulle graag dit wil merk. Daar's die grootskaalste killery wat jy denkbaar kan kry. En uiteindelik kry jy 'n beeld van 'n skool wat nooit die bedoeling was nie. En nou gebruik hulle hierdie uitslae om skole in 'n rangorde te plaas, teen mekaar af te speel, onderwysers te dissiplineer, en dis nie wat ons wil hê nie. En daarom gaan ons nou 'n stelsel weer probeer om die hele stelsel te herontwerp in die volgende 90 dae. Die onderwysstelsel die volgende. U kan daar self sien, dis die deurvloei, en my goeie vriend, Dr. Taylor het vanoggend reeds daarna verwys, en ek weet die professor De Villiers het ook daarna verwys oor die deurvloei by skole, maar in die onderwysstelsel lyk dit net so sleg. By SAOI skole is dit dramaties beter, daar het ons 'n deurvloei van 85 na 90%. Wat jy daar kan kyk is die volgende, en dis 'n ongelooflike getuigskrif van SAOI-lede, en ek praat spesifiek van SAOI-lede, want dis die lede wat ek goed ken, en hier is talle van hulle in hierdie saal vandag. Wat jy daar sal sien is hoe jy kan kyk na en dit vergelyk met die res van die stelsel. As jy daar gaan kyk, skole met 1 of meer SAOI-lede, skole met 5 of meer lede, en skole met 5 of meer lede in die hoof, sal jy sien daarso, is die geslaagsyfer 95% teenoor die stelsel van 75.8. En dit beteken net een ding, daar's ongelooflik goeie werksetiek wat daar plaasvind, en dis onderwysers wat elke dag in die klaskamer is en hulle werk doen. Maar wat dit ook vir jou sê is dat die ouens in die laerskole doen net sulke goeie werk, want jy kan in die hoërskool niks doen as die ouens in die laerskool nie vir jou goeie resultate gee nie. Ek wil ook net vir 'n oomblik stil staan om vir u te sê, as jy met die universiteite praat van waar lê die topskole, sal hulle vir jou sê dat van die 100 topskole is daar slegs 2 privaat skole wat presteer. Die topskole is die doodgewone goeie Afrikaanse openbare skole. En dis nie die high flyers nie, is goeie doodgewone skole. As jy nou kyk daar na die anders, en ons het al baie daarna verwys, kan jy sien daarso, in al daardie tale, soos hulle vorder in grade 1, 2 en 3, word die prestasie al hoe swakker. As jy kyk na spesifiek Afrikaans en Engels hieronder, sal jy ook sien dat soos hulle vorder van graad 1 na graad 9 in beide Afrikaans en in Engels, word hulle ook al hoe swakker. En dis kommerwekkend, en niemand diagnoseer daai probleem en sê waar lê die probleem nie, en wat doen ons om dit aan te spreek nie, want die oomblik wat ons klaar is met die 1 jaar se annas, dan is ons weer by die volgende jaar se annas. En dan oefen almal in, en soos hulle gemaak het hierdie jaar, die hele Vrystaat, die hele Noordwes, die hele Augustus spandeer om voor te berei vir die annas. Wat jy daar kan sien, die volgende skyfietjie daarbo, dis baie onduidelik, is die hele kwessie van, waar is my pointer nou? Maar in elk geval, wat jy daar sal sien is die kwintiele. En daar's 'n duidelike verband tussen die sosio-ekonomiese welstand van 'n gemeenskap en die prestasie. En 'n mens moet dit in ag neem wanneer jy kyk na die prestasies en jy moet dit kan kontekstualiseer. Maar wat onweerlegbaar is, dat ongeag watter kwintiel jy na kyk, soos die kinders vorder in die stelsel, word hulle net swakker. Presteer hulle swakker. Kortliks net vir 'n oomblik daar stil staan. Hier gaan dit oor graad 6 onderwysers wat toets geskryf het. Daar is die Suid-Afrikaanse leerders, hulle het 24% gekry. Daar is die graad 6 onderwysers, hulle het 48% gekry. Wat jy daar kan sien, die donkerrooi balkies is ander lande se onderwysers wat ook die toetse afgeneem het. So dis wat die punt waarna toe ek gaan is dit ek het nou vir die gewys hoe lyk die SAWI-lede of die Afrikaanse opvoeders se prestasies en dit lyk rooskleurig, maar as jy bietjie dieper kyk is dit nie so heeltemal so goed nie. Hierdie is weer eens die wiskunde prestasies. Daar is Suid-Afrika sin. Daar is ons bestes. En vergelyk dit met die swakstes van Kenia. Nou weer eens ek het gaan kyk na hoeveel Afrikaanse skole was daar van die steekproef gewees. Daar was presies te wees 2 Afrikaanse skole. So dit gee nie vir jou 'n heeltemal 'n goeie beeld nie. Moontlik as jy net die Afrikaanse skole gevat het, sou dit beter gewees het, maar is nie noodwendig dat dit altyd beter is nie. Ons het bietjie gaan weier lees en ons het gaan kyk na die hele kwessie van wat is die minimum kennis wat 'n onderwyser oor moet beskik as jy wil wiskunde gee, en spesifiek graad 3. En almal dink jy kan graad 3 gee net met 'n basiese kennis. Die lank en die kort is dat daar is 'n minimum professionele kennis wat 'n onderwyser nodig het. En almal dink dat as jy kan graad 5 wiskunde doen, kan jy maklik gaan graad 3 wiskunde gee of graad 3 geletterdheid. Die navorsers kom tot die gevolgtrekking dat jy moet veel meer weet van wiskunde as om doodgewoon net te kan gaan klas gee. Jy het 'n werklike minimum professionele kennis nodig om dit te kan doen. En by die SAWI het ons toe gaan navorsing doen en ons het die volgende tot vir mekaar gesê dat ons is al 'n geruime tyd bekommerd oor die vlak van die vakkennis van ons lede. En by die dagbestuur het ons tot die gevolgtrekking gekom om te sê dat ons wil 'n aanvaarbare standaard sê. Wat is die minimum aanvaarbare standaard? Daai minimum professionele kennis. En die dagbestuur het die besluit geneem en ook die professionele komitee dat as 'n onderwyser klas gee vir graad 6, dan moet jy die minimum hê van omtrent graad 9. Ons het toe kursusse ontwikkel en ons het toe gaan maar net asseblief. Ons het 'n loodsprojek gehad nou in Julie maand. Gaan net vir my nog hier aan. Nog. En ons het toe gaan kyk na wat is die kwalifikasies van die onderwysers en wat jy daar sal sien is dat hulle het 'n graad in ander vakke en graad in een van die vakke. Dit was wetenskap en tegnologie was 2 gewees. En dan kan jy ook hier aan die onderkant kyk wat is hulle ervaring. En wat jy daar sal sien, daar's 'n hele klomp jong mense daarso. En dit slaan ook terug op wat Nick gesê het van die kwaliteit van onderwysers wat tans in die stelsel inkom. Gaan vir my nog een aan vinnig. Hier is die toetsprestasies en jy kan self sien hoe die mense gepresteer daarso. Nie skouspelagtig nie, net die posttoetse. Dit was nie die pre-toetse nie. Gaan vir my nog een aan na wiskunde toe. En daar kan jy ook sien wat is hulle hoogste kwalifikasies. Gaan vir my nog een aan. En hier is die prestasies wat hulle bereik het. Hulle het die graad 6 juffrouens het die graad 9 toetse geskryf. Dis nie net juffrouens nie, dis 'n paar mans ook gewees. En wat jy kan sien is, hulle is nie in staat om die graad 9 leermateriaal te kan bemeester nie. Gaan vir my aan. Gaan nog aan. Nog, maak gou vir my vol, ek wil net hierso. Die belangrike ding wat hier noodsaaklik is waarvan ons moet kennis neem, kollegas, is dat vakspesialisasie is uiters noodsaaklik in die fase van graad 4 tot 6. Jy kan nie net meer 'n onderwyser voor in daai klas sit nie. Jy het vakspesialisasie nodig En baie belangrik, jy het taalspesialiste nodig, mense wat weet hoe om taal te onderrig, wat weet as kinders 'n leesprobleem het en wat daai ding kan aanspreek. Ek sê vir u baie dankie hiervoor. Mooi dag vir u.
Goeiemôre. Ek wil net as 'n verskoning vra dat ek my toespraak in Engels voorberei het vir 2 redes. Ek het 10 jaar in Amerika gebly en 15 jaar in Durban en in daai 25 jaar het ek nog nooit 'n openbare toespraak in Afrikaans gelewer nie. Maar alhoewel my vrou is van Hermanus in Stanford. So ons het baie baklei in Afrikaans. Maar nou ongelukkig 2 jaar het sy na haar stryd met kanker verloor en so is ek nou weer terug by die Engels. Die ander rede is omdat ek glo dat hier op Stellenbosch wat die pragtigste Afrikaans gepraat. Ek kan nie naby kom nie. So ek sal maar hou met die Engels taal as hier nie. Chris Klopper is a person who I have the greatest respect for. I think he's one of the foremost thinkers in education. Every time I hear him, I say, well, how come I can't disagree with him? Nick Taylor, another very good friend, and many people here that I know. So in the 10 minutes that I have, I want to present 5 challenges. But not, we are sick and tired just of challenges. We also have to understand that these challenges can also be seen as possibilities. And when Melinda speaks, she will speak from the perspective of partners for possibilities. Because there are 2 ways to look at this country. You can look at all the problems. And you can say, well, we're all going down. Or you can say, I admit that these are challenges, but they also present possibilities. And this is the talk, just very briefly, that I want to give today. The first thing is hope. So never give up hope, because hope is a belief that things can get better. But you can't just believe that vacuously. You have to have a reason why you believe that. So we have to do something so that we have a basis for our hope. Good. So challenge number 1, we have to realize, there's no point in saying it's leaking on your side of the boat. This whole country will go down if we don't embrace the broader realities. There's not only one reality. There are at least 2 realities in this country. And we have to embrace all. If we are on a boat, and this country is a leaking boat, and if I sit on this side of the boat and I say, but it's leaking on your side of the boat, we all go down. So let's find a way, and I will end with that, let's find a way to walk together in a country that we all love very deeply and very dearly. So there are 2 educational realities. And for the majority of young people, the home environment and an unfavorable school environment overshadow any individual ability. And I just want to say this before I forget, that if we're going to change education in this country, we are going to have to change all public schools. There are 25,000 schools, 6,000 independent schools. So if you think about it, if you want to change education in this country, the independent sector is not growing. I just spoke at the independent school conference with Nick the other day. It's not growing at a rapid rate, 6% a year. So I want to say that that is our challenge. So let me just look at this. Nick Spall, who works with Safas van der Berg. You can just, I'll tell you when to stop. Okay, so this is, keep on going. We have the South African sector, unemployed 35%, low productivity jobs 55%, and high productivity jobs 10%. Now where do the people come from that work? There's a 20% at the top and an 80% at the bottom. You should be able to click some more. Yeah? More? Okay. So we have an unequal society. With 80%, that constitutes the broad reality, and the small. If you're rich, and it doesn't matter what color you are, and what language you talk, if you're rich, you can access the green, the best schools, and therefore you can access the top. 10% high productivity. Otherwise, you're at the bottom. And that is true for 80% of the people in this country. 80%. And the tragedy is, if you can't afford it, you'll go to these low-quality schools, and you will either end up as unemployed or low-productivity jobs. And if you have children, they go back. And that's the vicious cycle that we talked about. The next slide is just simply saying there's a cycle of poor performance, which you can just run through. You know, there's an increased demand for education, and that demand is not met, and there are various reasons for that, which I'm not going to go into for the sake of time. Let me just focus on this one issue, which is poverty. You know, there are two books. The one somebody stole, but I reordered it. It's called Teaching with Poverty in Mind. Jensen, I don't know if anybody here has read it. It's another one, A Mind Shaped by Poverty. And poverty is the inability to participate in society with dignity. And if you realize that you cannot participate in society with dignity, you find other ways to satisfy your needs. There are various kinds of poverty. And I want to say there's, something bad can happen to any one of us. A crisis can come into our lives, and we find ourselves in poverty. What I experience, one of the things that I've done is after living 10 years in America and 15 years in Durban, I came back to Cape Town, where I was born. I bought a house from my mother, where I grew up, and I lived there. So when I wake up in Aslan, in Belgravia, and I see this kind of things that's on the board here. Generational poverty, from one generation to the other. Absolute poverty, where you just don't have the basic things. And then there's a big difference between urban and rural poverty. But I want to say this, and it comes in one of the other slides, that there's another kind of poverty, which is an absence, for me, in the final analysis. Poverty is not so much got to do with the absence of goods. It's an absence of power. That's a real poverty. And even if you have all the money in the world, you can still be poor because you have an absence of relationships. And in this country, that is what we need to try and do. Poverty, the next slide. When I lived in America, in the inner cities, I lived in upstate New York. And I visited many big cities in America. And the difference for me always has been, in America, that there is no poverty of opportunity in the inner cities, but there's a deep poverty of aspiration. In this country, there's no poverty of aspiration. There's a deep poverty of opportunity. And that, I think, is the thing that we have to face, that we have created an unjust system where there is a poverty of operation, and yet poor children can experience emotional and academic success, and we have to believe that. I'm one of them, and if I have a minute, I will tell my story in a minute. But children who live in poverty want the same things as other children. They want to be treated with respect and given equal opportunity. And if you look at that book, Teaching with Poverty in Mind, it speaks for the majority of this country. I want to go to the next slide because I want to move on to the next challenge. Brian Schroeder, who was going to speak here, gave me these two slides. So, the quintiles, 1 to quintile 5. Poorest, quintile 1, least poor, quintile 5. If you look at that slide, because of the Litnum strategy over 10 years, let's take from 2006 to 2010. The poorest schools with the blue here at the bottom, quintile 1, improved every year. Now, if you take the next slide, you will see that there's a big differential. I don't have a pointer, but there's a big differential going from 2006 to 2007. I don't have time to explain this, but this comes with a very clear strategy. The Litnum strategy has 8 elements to it. And it involved the head office, and it involved the districts, and it involved the schools. And it was carried out consistently over many years. And what this is telling me is even in the poorest of the poorest schools, you can make a difference. And that evidence there, I wish I had more time to speak about it, is for me very clear. Okay, challenge number 2. The worst thing that can happen to a young person in this country is to drop out of school between grades 10 and 12. You can push a wheelbarrow if you only have primary school. But if you drop out between 10 and 12, and the dropout rate is very high. If you go to the next slide, you see the needs is not in education, not in employment, not in training. Those are the needs. And if you look at where of the 2.7, and this is about a few years old, that statistic, 2.8 million people that fall under needs. You know, between the ages of 18 and 24, there are 6.8 million people in this country. 3 million sitting on this heap called needs. And they are the people that are causing all kinds of social disruption in this country. And it is therefore our responsibility to make a difference through education. That is what I think we are called for. Look at where the highest number sits. Grade 10 and less than grade 12, almost 1 million people. That's a problem. Now, if I go to the next slide, the dropout rate from grade 10, I have to say the dropout rate up to grade 9 is not bad. But thereafter, you will notice year on year, if you take 2002, 876, next year 736, and it ends up with a huge drop year on year. And you can take any year, it's like that. And maybe that's because we didn't give enough attention to the issue of quality at the GET phase. So that's another discussion. Maybe somebody will ask the question. So what do learners need to grow? You need a balanced learning environment. You need caring relationships. You need learner resilience. And you need building of self-esteem and character. I will put that together in one. I've got just 2 or 3 more slides. But I want to say, when I was in matric, I was at a school in Athlone called Alexander Sinton. And somebody came to my school. You know, when I grew up, very few white people, almost none. I knew no white people. The only white people I knew were policemen. So this man came to our school, and he said to my principal, I want you to choose a boy and a girl to go with other boys and girls from the Cape Flats on an adventure into service around the Cape province. Anyway, cut a long story short, we went to many places, and at each place, somebody was asked to give a vote of thanks. I wasn't. I thought, well, you know, I was a very thin person. Maybe they didn't see me, but quiet. So finally, the second last day, this man came to me and he said, you know, I've been watching you. Tomorrow's our last day. I said, yeah. Yeah, he said, yeah, we're going to have lunch with the mayor of Cape Town, Mayor Ferry at the time. I said, yeah, okay. So he said, and we want you to give the vote of thanks. Well, I almost died. I never gave a speech ever in my life. Anyway, again, cut a long story short, he came to me after the speech. He said, I want to come to your house tomorrow to make a recording. And he said, so what are you doing next year? He said, well, you know, my father is a laborer in the city council for 44 years. My mother was a factory worker. And they had 7 children. And I was the oldest boy. And so there was no ways, it wasn't part of my possible self going to university. And this man said, when he came the next day, after he recorded, I want you to know that the Lion Club has agreed to give you a bursary for 2 years. After that, you're on your own. And you know, for him, it may have been a random act of charity, but for me, it was a defining moment. It changed my whole life. It changed my community, my family actually. Every sibling after that went to university. My brother is a dean here at Stellenbosch University in the medical school. He went to Harvard and to Oxford for his PhD. Peter, my next brother, is an advocate. He was second only to Willie Hofmeyer in the assets and forfeiture. And so each and every one of them went to university because of that one act. Because somebody believed in me. That's why I like this Rapport Fonds, because that's the kind of difference that we want to make in this country. And don't believe that because people are poor, that they have no value. So let me move on. Resilience, I wish I could talk about that. I've got 1 more minute. Challenge number 4. The problem is with schooling, it doesn't prepare learners either for higher education, and Nick Taylor spoke about higher education with reference to teaching, but for the world of work also. It's a problem. And learners perform very poorly. As head of Umalusi, clearly I know all about that. So if I want to go to my second last slide, I won't have time to talk about this. I have found, and I've just recently been around the country trying to find, well, actually, I said the reason why I'm so busy is I'm not trying to find corrupt people. They're everywhere. I'm trying to find one honest person. It's very hard in this country to find. So I've been doing this ministerial investigation into the selling of posts, as you know. But I found, even when I was at NEDU, the most important element in moving the needle as far as quality of education is concerned is the principle. And I wish I had time to talk about it, but I don't. 21st century learning, involving learners in leadership, getting the school governing body not only to look inwards, but change their gaze. They are there as a link between the school and the community. And a good school will do that. A school that builds character, and I don't have time to talk about these. I can talk about each one of them. A school that sees diversity. I listen very quickly when people talk about diversity. You should see diversity as a resource for learning. The stuff that I've known today, that I've come to know, that I learned from people that are different to me. If you just speak to the people that are the same, you learn nothing. You will die that way. But if you see diversity as a resource for learning, that's the time you grow. And that's important. Anyway, I don't have time. The last slide is the challenges. Challenge number 5. We need to find a way, and that's at the beginning I said, to walk together. It's easy to walk apart. You know the Dinokeng scenarios. You know, we can say, you go your way, we go your way. And I speak to a lot of business people, and they said, no, why should we support public schools? Our kids go to independent schools. We're not interested in this public school. So you go that way, we go this way. And in the Dinokeng scenarios, which I would encourage you, if you haven't seen it, to look at, you will see the consequences of that thinking. We can also just walk behind. Whatever government says, we just do. And that, again, is disastrous. You can't just walk behind government. And finally, we can find a way to walk together. And that's hard, very hard. It takes strong leadership to walk together. Sounds nice, but of the three options, that's the hardest. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Goeiemiddag almal. Unfortunately, I will also be delivering my short talk in English. Maar ek hou baie van die Afrikaanse taal en kyk net. I see you often. Okay, so I'm here today Henny asked me to speak about schools as beacons of hope in our community. I think before we move on to schools as beacons of hope, it is just right that we do acknowledge that our school system, we are experiencing a lot of challenges in our school system. We spoke about language this morning. And if we ignore these challenges that we are faced with, it's going to be a dire thing. Of the 1.1 million learners that enter grade 1 every year, only about 500,000 finish matric 12 years later. And of those, about 200,000 go on to live economically sustainable lives. And if we don't start changing what is happening in the education system, then our country is, I'm going to be dramatic when I say our country is going to burn. But we are not finding a way to work together, as Prof. Valmink spoke about. And that is why I'm here today, to share the Partners for Possibility story with you. Because I think it is a beautiful example of working together, of finding ways to be beacons of hope and finding ways for education to change what is happening in their communities. You spoke about principles, Prof. Valmink. And that is precisely where we focus on as the Partners for Possibility program. The reality is that for most school principals in South Africa, they don't actually get groomed and trained to take over leadership in their schools. The reality is that you've been a teacher for a long time, you've been a good teacher, and now you move into a leadership position without that process being facilitated. And if we look just for a moment, think for a moment at the corporate, think about the corporate sector, what we realize they do differently is that they groom people for leadership. And what we'd like to suggest as a Partners for Possibility program is that our school principals, as leaders of the education sector, get afforded the same kind of benefit, getting groomed and prepared and supported and equipped for the very vital roles. More and more, we're seeing how critical school leadership is to educational outcomes. There was a big study done, unfortunately, in the United States with thousands of schools. The outcome of that study proved that school principals don't just have indirect input on educational outcomes, they have a direct effect on the educational outcomes of the school system. And so through the Partners for Possibility program, what we are doing is finding ways to strengthen what is happening in terms of school leadership in South Africa. What the Partners for Possibility program essentially does is create a space for creativity and for business leaders and school leaders to come together in a way and really collaborate and partner to find creative solutions for challenges that many of our community schools are facing. And when I'm saying that, your mind can paint the picture of what that school looks like. What we are finding is that, and I suppose the idea is that school principals and business leaders will come together to learn from each other. So a principal will learn from a business leader. How would you do things different in your business? At the same time, the business leader learns from the school principal and gets to know community and becomes intimately knowledgeable about what is going on in a community that may be different from theirs. To date, the Partners for Possibility has launched about 347 of these partnerships in Gauteng, in the Western Cape, in the Eastern Cape, in KZN, and in Limpopo. And we're starting to see beacons of hope emerging in our communities. One such principal is sitting in the room today, and I'm so glad that Quentin is going to be able to speak about his leadership journey and the things that have changed in his life over the last few years. What Quentin got was something that not very many principals get. What Quentin got was someone, a person from sometimes a big corporate, sometimes for many other principals, not somebody from a big corporate, but somebody to walk alongside them for a period of 1 year and to support them on their journey of leadership in that school. They do a whole number of things together. They do communities of practice where they learn from each other, they network. It becomes a space for learning and for therapy, because I think that many of our principals are lonely and they feel abused, unfortunately, by what community throws at them. And so communities of practice becomes a space of safety where they're able to speak about the things that really matter to them. And where business partners can delve into the mind of community people and say, well, what is it that you are struggling with? And since business is getting involved in community, and that's not even an issue of debate, business is getting involved in education more and more. So how do we do it so that we are actually effecting change in communities? So Quentin, you're going to be speaking to us about that a little bit later. But what I'd like to say is that there are a whole number, I want to make it real. In Lavana Primary, in Lavender Hill, we've got a principal named Andre Lamprecht. His partner is Peter Venn. Together, they will be opening the first public library in Lavender Hill. Can you imagine it? That public library will not just serve the purpose of that school, but it will serve the purpose of the community around the school. And in effect, what that means is that the community around that school will feel a kind of recognition for the role that they play around the school, but there's a kind of protection that comes when somebody feels that they've got ownership of what happens in that school. There's Sopakama Primary in Dunoon, where Irene Robenheimer and Sabello have been working together for the last 2 to 3 years. They've not only started an amazing feeding scheme using people in the community, in the food garden, but they've started a literacy program and a numeracy program in that school. They've come together not just as these two individuals to work together, but they've actually brought together a ROGS community, which is the business community, and the faith-based community around Irene into the Dunoon Sopakama primary community. And essentially what is happening there is that you've got communities that have never been a part of each other's lives. We've now built a bridge there. It's not solely about providing support and leadership development for school principals and business leaders. It's also about nation building. It's about us finding each other and working together to the ultimate good like we should be. There's Kannemeyer Primary in Grassy Park. There's Rietenbosch in Stellenbosch, Clutisville, St. Vincent Roman Catholic, Ligstraal School for Special Needs Learners in Paarl. We've got John Ramsey. We've got Fort Grey in the Eastern Cape. Each of these schools, each of these partnerships are starting to be a beacon of hope. They are bringing together people in community that should be working together. They are tackling issues of language. They are tackling issues of resources. They're saying, well, we are waiting for the department, but let's not wait all the time. Let's us do something that we can do to better our own situation. Let's unlock the promise and potential in our communities and start to do something that will bring hope to our communities at large. Thank you.